My daughter said I'm embarrassing in front of her friends. They saw my Tesla collection. Now, they called daily. When my daughter Victoria looked at me with pure disgust in front of her wealthy friends and said, "Dad, you're so embarrassing. Why can't you just dress normal and stop acting like some broke handyman?" I simply smiled, nodded, and walked to my garage. By the time her friends saw what was parked inside, their jaws were on the floor and their phones were buzzing with frantic texts to their parents. And that was just the beginning. For 25 years, I had quietly built a multi-million-dollar business while wearing the same old jeans and work boots. I had paid for Victoria's private school, her college, her fancy apartment, and her designer lifestyle without ever asking her to appreciate where the money came from. I thought I was teaching her humility and the value of hard work. They thought they were dealing with an embarrassing blue-collar dad who didn't understand their sophisticated world. They were about to learn I owned half the businesses their trust fund parents only dreamed of investing in. Justice must be restored and arrogance punished. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Harold Mitchell. I've spent the last 25 years building Mitchell Construction and Development from a one-man operation into the largest commercial construction company in 3 states. But if you saw me at the grocery store in my faded Carhartt jacket and steel-toed boots, you'd probably assume I was just another contractor picking up supplies. That was exactly how I liked it. After my wife, Catherine, died when Victoria was 12, I made a decision that would shape both our lives. I would work twice as hard to provide for my daughter, but I wouldn't let wealth change who we were. I kept living in our modest suburban home, driving practical vehicles, and wearing the same work clothes I'd worn since starting my business. What Victoria never understood was that her embarrassing father owned the company that built the shopping mall where she bought her designer clothes, the office complex where a friend's parents worked, and a luxury apartment building where 3 of her college friends now lived. I had quietly amassed a portfolio worth over $8 million while she assumed I was just scraping by as a small-time contractor. I paid for everything without complaint. Her tuition at Westbrook Academy, $28,000 a year. Her BMW when she turned 16. Her sorority fees, spring break trips, and summer study abroad programs. When she graduated college, I bought her a downtown apartment and gave her a generous monthly allowance while she found herself in the art world. But somewhere along the way, instead of gratitude, Victoria developed something much uglier: shame. It started small. She'd ask me to drop her off around the corner from school events, so her friends wouldn't see my work truck. She'd make excuses about why I couldn't attend her gallery openings or social gatherings. When her friends asked about her family, she'd mention her late mother, but somehow forget to mention her father entirely. The final straw came 3 weeks ago at her friend's engagement party. Victoria had specifically asked me to dress nice for once, so I wore my best button-down shirt and khakis instead of my usual work clothes. I thought I was making an effort to fit into her world. I was wrong. The party was at Meredith's parents' estate, a sprawling mansion in the hills that my company had actually built the custom deck and outdoor kitchen for 2 years earlier. I recognized the stonework immediately because I had personally overseen the installation. Victoria's friends were the typical crowd she'd surrounded herself with since college. Trust fund kids with family money, artistic types whose careers were subsidized by wealthy parents, and social climbers who measured worth by designer labels and Instagram followers. I try to make polite conversation, asking about their work and interests. But every topic seemed to lead back to money, their family's investments, their expensive hobbies, their luxury travel plans. When they asked what I did for work, I simply said I was in construction. "Oh, like a contractor?" asked Meredith's friend Skylar, with the kind of tone people use when they're trying to be polite about something they find distasteful. "Something like that," I replied. That's when Victoria's embarrassment became impossible to hide. "Dad builds things," she said quickly, clearly wanting to change the subject. "It's very practical work." The conversation moved on, but I caught the look that passed between her friends. The sympathetic glances that said, "Poor Victoria, having to deal with a blue-collar father who doesn't understand her sophisticated lifestyle." But the moment that changed everything happened when we were leaving. I had parked my everyday truck, a reliable but clearly well-used Ford F-150, next to the row of luxury cars in the circular driveway. As we walked toward it, I heard Skylar whisper to another friend, "God, I would die if my dad showed up to something like this in that truck." Victoria heard it too, and instead of defending me, she turned to me with pure venom in her eyes. "Dad, you're so embarrassing. Why can't you just dress normal and stop acting like some broke handyman? Do you have any idea how hard it is for me when you show up looking like you just came from construction site?" The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they revealed something I had been trying to ignore for years. My daughter was ashamed of me not because of anything I'd done wrong, but because she had completely lost sight of who was actually providing for her privileged lifestyle. I looked at her standing there in her $500 dress, holding her $1,000 purse, wearing jewelry I had bought her for her last 3 birthdays, and I realized I'd failed her as a father. Not because I hadn't given her enough, but because I had given her everything without teaching her where it came from. "You're right, Victoria," I said quietly. "I'm embarrassing. Let me show you just how embarrassing your old man really is." That night, I sat in my home office staring at the financial documents spread across my desk. Portfolio statements, property deeds, business valuations, and investment summaries that told the real story of Harold Mitchell's embarrassing life. Mitchell Construction and Development, valued at $4.2 million. Commercial real estate portfolio, 12 properties worth $2.8 million. Investment accounts, $1.3 million. Personal assets, including my home and vehicles, $800,000. Total net worth, just over $8 million. But the number that really caught my attention was Victoria's monthly allowance, for $1,000, plus the rent on her apartment, plus her car payment, plus her health insurance, plus a credit card I paid off every month without question. I was giving my daughter nearly $70,000 a year to maintain a lifestyle that allowed her to be embarrassed by her broke handyman father. The irony was so profound it was almost funny. Almost. I opened my laptop and started researching something I had never bothered to look into before, exactly how much Victoria's friends' families were actually worth. Thanks to public records, business filings, and social media detective work, I discovered some interesting facts. Meredith's father, the one with the mansion where my company had done the stonework, was a mid-level investment manager worth maybe $2 million on a good day. Skylar's family owned a chain of local restaurants that brought in decent money, but nothing spectacular. Most of Victoria's other friends were living off family money that was comfortable but not extraordinary. None of them had the kind of wealth that my daughter was enjoying, funded entirely by the embarrassing father she was ashamed to acknowledge. But what really opened my eyes was discovering Victoria's social media presence. Her Instagram account, which I had never bothered to look at, told a very different story about her life than the one I knew. In Victoria's online world, she was a successful independent artist living a glamorous city lifestyle entirely through her own talent and hard work. Her apartment was presented as evidence of her success, not as a gift from her father. Her designer clothes and expensive dinners were portrayed as the fruits of her artistic career, not her monthly allowance. Most telling of all, I was completely absent from her social media life. In 3 years of posts, there wasn't a single photo of us together, not one mention of family, nothing that acknowledged where her comfortable lifestyle actually came from. She had created an entire fictional narrative about her life that erased me completely. That's when I realized Victoria's embarrassment wasn't just about my appearance or my work clothes. She was ashamed of me because acknowledging my existence would force her to admit that her whole carefully crafted identity was a lie. The discovery that hurt most was finding her group text with her friends from the engagement party. Somehow, she had forgotten to log out of her messaging app on the iPad I had bought her for Christmas, and the conversation was still open on the screen. "OMG, your dad is so sweet," Meredith had written. "He was asking such thoughtful questions about everyone's work." "I know, he's just a lot," Victoria had replied. "He doesn't really understand social situations like that. I love him, but it's hard when he doesn't fit in with everyone else." "Honestly, Vic, I think you're being too hard on him," Skylar had added. My dad would never even come to something like that. At least yours cares enough to show up. You don't understand, Victoria had responded. It's different when your dad is just regular working class. He's sweet, but he doesn't get our world at all. Our world. As if she had been born into money instead of having it handed to her by the regular working class. Father, she was dismissing. I stared at that conversation for a long time, feeling something I hadn't experienced since Catherine's death, complete clarity about what needed to happen next. Victoria was about to learn exactly who was funding our world. The next morning, I did something I had never done in 25 years of business. I started documenting everything. I made copies of every bank statement, every canceled check, every wire transfer that had gone to support Victoria's lifestyle. I printed out 3 years of credit card statements showing the designer clothes, expensive dinners, art supplies, and luxury purchases I had been quietly paying for. I gathered receipts for her tuition, her apartment rent, her car payments, and her monthly allowance transfers. The numbers were staggering when laid out in black and white. In the 3 years since her college graduation, I had given Victoria over $200,000 in direct support, not including major purchases like her car and apartment down payment. But documentation was only the first step. I needed to understand exactly how deep her deception went. I hired a private investigator, something I never thought I needed to do for my own daughter. Jackson Reeves was a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud cases, and I asked him to do a comprehensive background check on Victoria's lifestyle and social connections. What Jackson discovered was even worse than I had imagined. Victoria had been actively lying to her friends about her financial situation for years. She had told them her apartment was paid for by a family trust from her late mother's side. She claimed her art career was supporting her lifestyle and that her father was just a simple contractor who occasionally helped out with small expenses. Most damaging of all, she had been borrowing money from her friends under false pretenses. Jackson found evidence of at least $12,000 in loans she had received from friends for emergency expenses and investment opportunities that she had never repaid. Mr. Mitchell, Jackson told me when he delivered his report, your daughter has been running what's essentially a long-term confidence game on her social circle. She's created a false identity funded by your money while simultaneously portraying herself as financially independent. The evidence was clear. Victoria wasn't just embarrassed by me. She was actively profiting from erasing me from her life story. But Jackson's investigation revealed something else that would prove crucial to my plan. Detailed information about all of Victoria's friends and their families' actual financial situations. It turned out my instincts were correct. Most of her social circle was far less wealthy than they pretended to be. Several of the families were struggling with debt, job losses, or business failures that they were hiding from their own children. The wealth Victoria's friends displayed was often as carefully constructed an illusion as her own. There's something else you should know, Jackson added. Your daughter's friend group has been talking about you since the engagement party, but not in the way you might think. He pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots from various social media accounts. Several of them have been asking questions about your business. One of them even looked up Mitchell Construction online and found some of your commercial projects. They're starting to realize there might be more to your story than Victoria has been telling them. This was perfect. Victoria's friends were already curious about me, which meant they were primed for the revelation I was planning. I spent the next week making strategic preparations. I updated my business website to include a complete portfolio of our major projects, including several buildings that Victoria's friends would definitely recognize. I arranged for professional photos of my private vehicle collection, something I had kept hidden in a climate-controlled garage facility across town. Most importantly, I made one crucial decision. I was going to stop hiding my success, not to show off, but to force Victoria to confront the reality of where her privileged lifestyle actually came from. The plan was simple and devastating. I would let Victoria's own friends discover the truth about their embarrassing contractor friend and then watch as her carefully constructed lies unraveled in the most public way possible. What Victoria and her friends didn't know was that I had been quietly collecting some very interesting toys over the years. While they saw an embarrassing contractor in work clothes, I've been investing in my real passion, high-performance vehicles. Hidden in a private garage facility 20 minutes from my house, I kept my actual car collection, not as a status symbol or investment strategy, but because I genuinely loved engineering excellence and had the money to indulge that interest. My collection included 6 vehicles that most people only dream about. A 2023 Tesla Model S Plaid in midnight blue, the fastest production sedan ever made. A 2022 Porsche 911 Turbo S that could hit 60 miles per hour in under 3 seconds. A fully restored 1967 Shelby GT500 that I'd spent 2 years personally rebuilding. A Tesla Model X with falcon wing doors that never failed to turn heads. A limited edition Ford GT that was worth more than most people's houses. And my newest addition, a Tesla Roadster prototype that I had acquired through connections in the automotive industry. The total value of the collection was approximately $1.8 million. More than most of Victoria's friends' families were worth entirely. But the cars were just the beginning of my plan. I had also been quietly collecting something else. Detailed knowledge of every construction project in the city where Victoria's friends lived, worked, and socialized. Because Mitchell Construction had been involved in building or renovating most of the high-end commercial and residential properties in our area. The shopping center where Meredith worked at her friend's boutique, we built it. The office complex where Skylar's boyfriend had his marketing job, we renovated the entire building last year. The trendy restaurant where Victoria's friend group had their weekly brunches, we designed and installed the entire kitchen and dining room. I had been literally building the world that Victoria was ashamed to admit I belonged to. My plan was brilliantly simple. I would host a casual garage tour for anyone interested in seeing some classic cars. Victoria's friends, who had been asking questions about my business since the engagement party, would be naturally curious. I would let them discover my collection and my business success organically, without Victoria present to control the narrative. The psychological impact would be devastating. Not only would her friends realize that the embarrassing contractor was actually wealthier than most of their families combined, but they would also understand that Victoria had been lying to them about her own financial situation for years. What they didn't know was that I had been building my case for weeks. I had documentation of every dollar I had given Victoria. I had evidence of her lies to her friends about her income and lifestyle. I had proof that she had been borrowing money from friends under false pretenses while secretly living off a $70,000 annual allowance from her broke father. But the masterstroke of my plan involved something Victoria had no idea I possessed: complete recordings of her conversations with friends about me. Since discovering her group text, I had been paying closer attention to how she talked about me when she thought I couldn't hear. Using a simple recording app on my phone, I had captured several conversations where she mocked my appearance, dismissed my intelligence, and actively lied about my financial situation to maintain her fake social status. The most damaging recording was from just 3 days after the engagement party. Victoria had been on a video call with friends while I was in the next room working on some business paperwork. She didn't know I could hear her, and she certainly didn't know I was recording. He just doesn't understand that there are different social levels, she had said. Like, he thinks showing up in work clothes to a nice event is perfectly fine because he doesn't realize how it reflects on me. I love him, but he's basically from a completely different class of people. Victoria, maybe you should help him understand how to dress for these things. Meredith had suggested. I've tried, but you can't really change someone's background, you know? He's sweet, but he's just simple. He doesn't get business or finance or anything sophisticated. He builds things with his hands, which is fine, but it's not exactly the same as understanding complex social situations. That recording alone would destroy Victoria's credibility with her friends. But I had collected much more damaging evidence. I had recordings of her lying about where her money came from. I had documentation of her borrowing money she didn't need while receiving a monthly allowance larger than most people's salaries. I had proof that she had been systematically erasing me from her life story while living entirely off my financial support. The midpoint of my plan centered around one perfectly orchestrated moment. Victoria's friend group would discover my wealth and success at the exact same time They learned about her lies and deception. What they didn't know was that I had already arranged for that moment to happen in the most dramatic way possible. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Victoria called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice tight with annoyance. "Dad, I need you to do me a huge favor," she said without any pleasantries. "Meredith's car broke down, and she needs to borrow something to get to a job interview tomorrow. Can you let her borrow your truck for a few hours?" I almost laughed out loud. After weeks of calling me embarrassing, she wanted her friend to drive my humiliating work truck. "Of course," I said. "But actually, I have a better idea. Why don't I pick her up and drive her to the interview myself? That way she won't have to worry about driving an unfamiliar vehicle." "Dad, that's really not necessary." He interrupted. "It's the least I can do after how welcoming her family was at the engagement party." Victoria couldn't argue without seeming ungrateful, so she reluctantly agreed to give Meredith my number. When Meredith called that evening, she sounded genuinely grateful and slightly nervous. "Mr. Mitchell, Victoria said you might be able to help me get to my interview tomorrow. My car died and I can't afford to fix it right now. And this job is really important." "Absolutely," I said warmly. "What time do you need to be there?" 10 in the morning, downtown at the Morrison Financial Building." "Perfect." Morrison Financial was housed in a building that Mitchell Construction had completely renovated 2 years earlier. I knew the building manager personally. "I'll pick you up at 9:30, I told her. "That'll give us plenty of time." The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of driving my work truck, I went to my private garage and selected the Tesla Model S Plaid. When I pulled up to Meredith's apartment building in the sleek midnight blue sedan, I could see her face through the lobby window. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock to something approaching disbelief. She walked out slowly, staring at the car like it might be a mirage. "Mr. Mitchell?" she asked uncertainly. "Good morning, Meredith," I said, getting out to open her door. "Ready for your interview?" The ride downtown was enlightening. Meredith kept looking around the car's luxurious interior, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. This is a really nice car," she said finally. "Thank you. I have a bit of a weakness for well-engineered vehicles." "Victoria never mentioned that she said you were in construction." "I am in construction," I replied. "I own Mitchell Construction and Development. We're the company that renovated the building where your interview is, actually." I could see her mind working, trying to reconcile this information with everything Victoria had told her about her simple contractor father. When we arrived at the Morrison Financial Building, I parked in the executive parking area and walked Meredith to the lobby. "Good morning, Harold," the building manager called out when he saw me. "How's business?" "Can't complain, Nathan. Just dropping off a friend for an interview." "Well, if she's a friend of yours, she's in good hands. Your company did beautiful work on this building." Meredith's face was a study in confusion and dawning realization. After her interview, which apparently went very well, I drove her back to her apartment. But instead of dropping her off immediately, I made a suggestion that would accelerate my timeline perfectly. "Meredith, I know Victoria has been telling you I'm just a simple contractor, and I understand why she might be embarrassed by her old man's lifestyle. But since you seem interested in cars, would you like to see the rest of my collection sometime? I have a few other vehicles that might interest you." Her eyes lit up with genuine curiosity. "You have more cars like this?" "A few. I keep them at a private facility across town. You're welcome to bring Victoria and any other friends who might be interested. This weekend, maybe?" Yes, I'd love that. Can I ask Victoria and the others?" "Of course. Saturday afternoon works for me." That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Dad, Meredith said you have more cars?" "What's she talking about?" I responded simply. "Why don't you come see for yourself? Saturday at 2 p.m. I'll text you the address." By Friday, Meredith had apparently told the entire friend group about the Tesla and the building renovation comment. My phone started ringing with calls from Victoria, each one more frantic than the last. "Dad, what exactly did you tell Meredith about your business?" "Dad, why didn't you ever mention you knew the Morrison building?" "Dad, how many cars do you actually have?" I answered each call with the same response. "Why don't we discuss it on Saturday?" Everything will make more sense then. Saturday morning, I went to my private garage facility and spent 2 hours preparing for the revelation that would change Victoria's life forever. I arranged the vehicles in a perfect display, with information cards showing the specifications and values of each car. I also brought copies of Mitchell Construction's portfolio, including photos of every major building we had constructed or renovated in the city. At exactly 2 p.m., I watched through the security cameras as 5 luxury cars pulled into the parking lot of my garage facility. Victoria and her entire friend group had come to see what her embarrassing contractor father had been hiding. They were about to discover that the man they had dismissed was worth more than all their families combined. And that was just the beginning. The moment Victoria and her friends walked into my private garage, the silence was deafening. 6 pristine, museum-quality vehicles sat under perfect lighting like automotive sculptures. The Tesla Model S Plaid that Meredith had ridden in was just the beginning. The Porsche 911 Turbo S gleamed in racing yellow. The restored 1967 Shelby GT 500 commanded attention with its aggressive stance and mirror-perfect paint. The Tesla Model X stood with its falcon wing doors raised like mechanical wings. The limited edition Ford GT looked like it had driven straight off a racetrack. And the Tesla Roadster prototype, a car that most people would never even see in person, sat like a vision of the future. "Holy shit," whispered Skylar, then immediately covered her mouth. "Sorry, Mr. Mitchell. This is incredible." Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, her face cycling through confusion, shock, and something approaching panic. She was realizing that everything she thought she knew about her father, and everything she had told her friends, was completely wrong. "Dad," she said slowly, "what is all this?" "This is what I do with some of my money when I'm not paying for your apartment, your car, your credit cards, and your monthly allowance," I replied calmly. The information cards next to each vehicle told the story my work clothes had hidden. Tesla Model S Plaid, $130,000. Porsche 911 Turbo S, $207,000. Shelby GT 500 restoration, $180,000 in parts and labor. Tesla Model X, $142,000. Ford GT, $500,000. Tesla Roadster prototype, priceless. Meredith was doing math in her head, and her eyes were getting wider with each calculation. "Victoria," she said quietly, "you told us your dad was just a small contractor." "He is," Victoria said weakly, but even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded with nearly $2 million worth of cars surrounding us. "Actually," I said, pulling out my business portfolio, "I think there might be some confusion about what I do for work." I opened the portfolio to the first page, a photo of the downtown skyline with small markers on 12 different buildings. These are just the commercial properties Mitchell Construction has built or renovated in the past 5 years. I turned to photos of specific projects. This is the shopping center where Meredith works. This is the office complex where Tyler's marketing firm is located. This is the restaurant where you all have brunch every Sunday. This is the apartment building where 3 of you live. The silence stretched as they realized the scope of what I was showing them. "Wait," said Tyler slowly. "You built half the places we hang out? Built, renovated, or provided major construction services for, yes." Victoria was staring at me like I was a stranger. "Dad, I don't understand. If you're so successful, why do you always dress like? Why do you drive that old truck? Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I was trying to teach you humility and the value of hard work," I replied. "I wanted you to understand that character matters more than wealth, that how you treat people is more important than what you own." I paused, letting that sink in. "But somewhere along the way, instead of learning those lessons, you became ashamed of me. You started lying to your friends about where your money comes from. You created an entire false narrative about your life that erased me completely." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the garage's sound system. "I think your friends deserve to hear how you really talk about your embarrassing father." The recording started playing, Victoria's voice, clear as day, explaining to her friends that I was simple and didn't understand complex social situations and came from a completely different class of people. The look on her friends' faces as they listened was devastating. They were hearing Victoria mock and dismiss the man who had just revealed himself to be more successful than any of their families. But I wasn't done. There's something else you all should know, I continued. Victoria has been borrowing money from several of you for emergencies and opportunities while receiving a monthly allowance from me that's larger than most people's salaries. I pulled out the financial documents showing her monthly transfers, her credit card payments, and her rent payments. $4,000 a month, plus rent, plus car payment, plus health insurance, plus any emergency expenses she claims to need. That's nearly $70,000 a year that I've been giving her while she tells you she's financially independent. Skylar looked at the bank statements, then at Victoria. You borrowed $3,000 from me last month for art supplies while your dad was giving you $4,000. The web of lies was unraveling in real time. Meredith stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly. Victoria, you told us your trust fund was paying for your lifestyle. You said your dad occasionally helped with small expenses. You've been letting us feel sorry for you because you had to deal with a working-class father. And meanwhile, Tyler added, looking around the garage, your father is apparently richer than all our families combined. Victoria's face had gone completely pale. Dad, why are you doing this to me? I'm not doing this to you, Victoria. I'm showing your friends who I actually am, instead of the embarrassing character you've been pretending I am. The question is, why have you been lying to the people who care about you? The garage fell silent, except for the sound of Victoria starting to cry. But her friends weren't looking at her with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her with something much worse, disappointment and betrayal. Victoria, Meredith said finally, we need to talk. Within 24 hours of the garage revelation, Victoria's social world had completely collapsed. Her friends had spent Saturday evening comparing stories and discovered the full scope of her deception. She had borrowed money from 5 different people over the past 2 years, always with sob stories about financial emergencies or promising investment opportunities that never materialized. The total was over $18,000, money she had taken while receiving nearly $6,000 a month in support from her broke father. Skylar was the first to confront the financial fraud directly. She called me Sunday morning. Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Did Victoria really need to borrow $3,000 from me last month for art supplies? I pulled up her credit card statement on my computer. Skylar, in a month you're talking about, Victoria charged $1,400 in art supplies to the credit card I pay for. She also received her usual $4,000 allowance and had no emergency expenses. So she lied to me and stole my money. That appears to be the case. Mr. Mitchell, I'm a paralegal. What Victoria did is fraud. She obtained money under false pretenses while concealing her actual financial situation. If I wanted to, I could file criminal charges. This was exactly what I had been hoping would happen. Victoria's legal troubles wouldn't be coming from me. They would be coming from the friends she had betrayed. By Sunday afternoon, I received calls from 3 other members of Victoria's friend group. Each one had a similar story of loans that were never repaid, emergency expenses that turned out to be fictional, and investment opportunities that were actually just Victoria funding her lifestyle beyond even the generous allowance I was providing. But the most devastating call came from Meredith. Mr. Mitchell, I've been thinking about everything you showed us yesterday, and I have a question. Victoria told us last year that you needed help paying for her mother's medical bills before she died, and that's why she couldn't pay us back some of the money she'd borrowed. Is that true? I felt my heart sink. Using Catherine's memory as part of her con game was a new low, even for Victoria. Meredith, my wife Catherine, died 13 years ago from a sudden heart attack. There were no extended medical bills. Her life insurance policy paid for everything, and my business was already successful enough to handle any expenses anyway. So Victoria lied about her mother's medical bills to avoid paying back money she borrowed? It appears that way. That conversation was the final straw for Victoria's former friend group. By Monday, they had organized themselves into a coordinated response that was more devastating than any legal action I could have taken. First, they demanded full repayment of all loans within 30 days, with interest. The total amount was over $20,000. Money Victoria didn't have because she had spent it on luxury purchases instead of the emergencies she had claimed. Second, they collectively cut her off from their social circle. No more brunches, no more gallery openings, no more group trips or parties. Victoria's entire social identity was built around this friend group, and they had decided she was no longer welcome. Third, and most damaging of all, they began telling other people in their extended social network exactly what had happened. Within a week, Victoria's reputation in the local art scene was destroyed. Gallery owners who had been considering her work suddenly became unavailable. Social events she had been invited to were quietly rescinded. The social consequences were swift and brutal, but the financial reckoning was even more significant. Victoria called me Tuesday evening, sobbing, "Dad, I need help. Everyone wants their money back, and I don't have it. Can you lend me $20,000? Victoria, I've been giving you $70,000 a year for 3 years. Where has that money gone? I spent it on living expenses and art supplies, and you spent it on designer clothes, expensive dinners, and luxury purchases that you posted on social media to maintain the illusion that you were financially successful. Now you want me to bail you out of the fraud you committed against your friends. Dad, please. I made mistakes, but I'm your daughter. You're right. You're my daughter, which is why I'm going to help you learn from this situation instead of enabling you to continue lying and stealing." I hung up and called my attorney. By Thursday, I had restructured Victoria's entire financial situation. The monthly allowance was terminated immediately. The credit card I had been paying was canceled. The lease on her expensive apartment was not being renewed, and I was no longer paying the rent. Most importantly, I had established a trust fund that would provide for Victoria's basic needs: food, modest housing, health care, and transportation, but nothing more. No laquisho de lifestyle, no designer clothes, no expensive diners. Just enough to survive while she figured out how to support herself honestly. The trust fund came with conditions. Victoria would have to get a real job and demonstrate 6 months of financial responsibility before receiving any additional support. She would have to pay back the money she had borrowed from her friends using her own earnings. And she would have to complete a financial literacy course and attend counseling to address her deceptive behavior. Mr. Mitchell, my attorney, said when we finished the paperwork, "This is either going to teach your daughter some very important lessons, or it's going to destroy your relationship with her permanently." My relationship with her was already destroyed, I replied. She was ashamed of me while living off my money and lying to everyone about her life. At least this way, she'll have a chance to build something real. The final piece of Victoria's reckoning came Friday afternoon when I received a call from Tyler. "Mr. Mitchell, I wanted you to know that Skylar decided to file a police report about the money Victoria took from her. The detective said it's a clear case of fraud, and they're moving forward with charges. So Victoria would be facing not just social and financial consequences, but potential criminal charges as well. Justice was being served, but not by me. It was being served by the very people she had betrayed while trying to maintain her fake social status." Victoria showed up at my house the following Saturday morning, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usual designer outfit had been replaced by jeans and a plain t-shirt, and she was driving a beat-up Honda Civic that I didn't recognize. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. I invited her into the living room where this whole situation had started, where she had first expressed shame about my appearance and my work. "I borrowed the car from my roommate," she said before I could ask. "I had to move out of my apartment. I'm staying with someone from the coffee shop where I got a job." "A job? That's good news." "Dad, please don't be sarcastic right now. I'm trying to fix this." She looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. The modest furniture, the simple decorations, the complete absence of any display of wealth. I had created a comfortable but unassuming home while secretly being worth $8 million. "I don't understand you," she said finally. "If you're so successful, why do you live like this? Why did you let me think we were just getting by?" Why didn't you teach me about money and business and all the things you obviously know? Because I was trying to teach you something more important than money. I was trying to teach you character, humility, and the value of treating people with respect regardless of their social status. I sat down across from her. Victoria, I didn't hide my wealth to deceive you. I hid it to prevent it from corrupting you. I wanted you to grow up understanding that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account or their job title or their appearance. But I never learned any of that, she said, tears starting again. I learned the opposite. I learned to be ashamed of anything that wasn't prestigious or sophisticated or wealthy. Yes, you did. And that's my failure as a father. The admission hung in the air between us. Dad, I know what I did was wrong. I know I lied to my friends and took money I didn't need and said horrible things about you. But why did you have to destroy my entire life? Why couldn't you just talk to me? Victoria, I tried to talk to you for years. Every time I suggested that your spending was excessive, you told me I didn't understand your lifestyle. Every time I tried to connect with your friends, you made it clear that I was an embarrassment. Every time I offered to teach you about money or business, you dismissed it as irrelevant to your artistic career. I pulled out my phone and showed her the recordings I had made. This is how you talked about me to your friends. Not just once, but consistently over months. You weren't just embarrassed by my appearance. You had convinced yourself that I was intellectually inferior, socially inadequate, and completely irrelevant to your sophisticated world. She listened to her own voice mocking me, calling me simple, dismissing my intelligence, and lying about our family's financial situation. When the recording ended, she was crying openly. Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I said those things. I don't know why I became such a horrible person. You became horrible because I enabled you to. I gave you everything you wanted without teaching you where it came from or what it cost. I let you live in a fantasy world where money appeared magically and you never had to consider the work and sacrifice that created your lifestyle. I leaned forward. But here's what I don't understand, Victoria. Even if you were embarrassed by me, even if you thought I was simple and unsophisticated, how could you steal from your friends? How could you lie about your mother's medical bills? How could you take money from people who cared about you while you were secretly receiving more money than most families live on? I don't know, she whispered. I started lying about small things to fit in, and then the lies got bigger, and then I couldn't stop. When people offered to lend me money, it seemed easier than admitting that my whole story was fake. So you committed fraud against people who trusted you. Yes, I committed fraud against people who trusted me. The simple admission was more honest than anything she had said to me in years. Dad, I know you have no reason to forgive me or help me or even speak to me again, but I'm trying to make this right. I got a job at a coffee shop. I'm paying my own rent. I'm going to pay back everyone I stole from, even if it takes me years. And the criminal charges? I'm going to plead guilty and accept whatever punishment the court decides. Skylar deserves justice, and I deserve consequences. For the first time since this whole situation began, I saw something in Victoria that I recognized, the daughter I tried to raise. Someone who took responsibility for her actions and was willing to face the consequences. Victoria, I want you to understand something. I didn't destroy your life. I revealed the truth about your life. The friends you lost weren't really your friends. They were people you were lying to and stealing from. The lifestyle you lost wasn't really yours. It was funded by the father you were ashamed to acknowledge. The reputation you lost wasn't based on your actual character or accomplishments. I stood up and walked to the window. What I destroyed was an illusion. What you're building now, a job, financial responsibility, honest relationships, that's real. It's not glamorous or sophisticated, but it's yours. She was quiet for a long time. Dad, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? Victoria, I already forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. You're going to have to earn back my trust, and more importantly, you're going to have to learn to trust yourself to be honest and responsible. Will you help me? I'll help you the way I should have helped you from the beginning. I'll teach you how to manage money responsibly. I'll help you understand the value of honest work. I'll support your basic needs while you build a real life for yourself. But no more designer clothes and expensive dinners and luxury apartments. Not until you can afford them with money you've earned honestly. She nodded, understanding finally sinking in. Dad, can I ask you one more thing? Of course. Will you teach me about your business? Not because I want your money, but because I want to understand how you built something real. For the first time in years, I smiled at my daughter with genuine pride. I like that very much. 6 months later, I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports when Victoria knocked on my door. She was wearing jeans and a Mitchell Construction t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she looked happier than I had seen her in years. Dad, the Riverside project estimates are ready for your review, she said, setting a thick folder on my desk. Victoria had surprised everyone, including herself, by discovering that she had a natural talent for construction project management. After 3 months of working at the coffee shop and attending business classes at the community college, she had asked if she could intern at Mitchell Construction. I had started her in the most basic position possible, filing paperwork and answering phones. But she had quickly demonstrated an aptitude for organization, attention to detail, and client communication that impressed our entire team. She was now handling initial project estimates and learning the fundamentals of commercial construction. These look good, I said, reviewing her work. Your cost calculations are getting more accurate. Thanks. I've been studying the materials pricing guides you gave me. The transformation in Victoria had been remarkable. Working a real job, paying her own expenses, and living within her actual means had given her a sense of purpose and self-respect that her previous lifestyle had never provided. She had also followed through on her commitment to make amends. Over 6 months, she had paid back every dollar she had borrowed from her friends, using her earnings from the coffee shop and later from her internship at my company. She had pleaded guilty to the fraud charges and received probation and community service, which she had completed without complaint. Most importantly, she had rebuilt her life on a foundation of honesty and hard work instead of lies and entitlement. Dad, I have some news, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Tyler called me yesterday. This was significant. Tyler was the first of her former friends to reach out after the confrontation 6 months earlier. He said he's been watching my social media posts about learning construction, and he wanted to apologize for how the group treated me after everything came out. That's good of him. He said they were all hurt and angry, but they realized they probably should have tried to help me instead of just cutting me off completely. I looked at my daughter carefully. How do you feel about that? Honestly, I think they did exactly what they should have done. I stole from them and lied to them for years. They had every right to be angry and to protect themselves from me. The maturity in that response was something the old Victoria would never have been capable of. But Tyler asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime, just to catch up. He said he's proud of how I've turned things around. Are you going to see him? Maybe. But if I do, it'll be as the person I actually am now, not as someone pretending to be something I'm not. She stood up to leave, then paused at the door. Dad, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry for being ashamed of you. I'm sorry for lying about you and dismissing you and treating you like you were somehow inferior to my friends' families. Victoria, no, let me finish. You built something incredible with this company. You created jobs for dozens of people. You improved this community with beautiful buildings. You raised me as a single father while running a business. And you did all of it with integrity and humility. She looked around my modest office, with its simple furniture and practical decorations. I understand now why you lived the way you did. You weren't hiding your success because you were ashamed of it. You were showing me that success doesn't have to change who you are or how you treat other people. It took me too long to learn that lesson, but I finally understand. Character isn't about what you own or what you wear or where you went to school. Character is about how you treat people, especially people who can't do anything for you. I stood up and walked around the desk to hug my daughter. Victoria, I'm proud of who you've become. Not because you're working for my company or because you paid back the money you owed. I'm proud because you chose to become honest and responsible, even when it was hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best thing I've ever done. As Victoria left my office to continue her work, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed. I no longer had to hide my success or pretend to be someone I wasn't. Victoria no longer had to maintain lies about her lifestyle or her family background. Our relationship was finally built on truth instead of shame, respect instead of embarrassment, and genuine connection instead of financial obligation. That evening, I drove home in my restored Shelby GT 500, something I had never done before Victoria's transformation. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding who I was or apologizing for what I had accomplished. And Victoria, who was making dinner in my kitchen using groceries she had bought with money she had earned, looked up when I walked in and smiled. "Nice car, Dad. I'm glad you're finally driving it. It feels good to stop hiding. It feels good to stop lying." We had both learned that the truth, however difficult, was always better than the alternative. The embarrassing contractor and his sophisticated daughter no longer existed. In their place were a successful businessman and his hardworking apprentice, finally building something real together.
If this story got you thinking, go ahead and hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that hit deep, and tap the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And hey, if you know someone who needs to hear this one, share it with them. Thanks for watching.